Time about how I think my roommate was trying to harvest my life force, and if not, she was still the creepiest roommate that I've ever heard of. This is Abby's Spooky Scary Storytime submission. If you're new here, Spooky Scary Storytime is a series where I share listeners' allegedly true, creepy, most unbelievable stories that you think nobody else would believe. This series started about a year ago. I used to do a lot of creepy roommate stories, and I love these kinds of stories. If you have one, please feel free to send it in. So this is Abby's story. She says this took place about 10 years ago, and at the time she was living in New York, and she had been living there for 2 years after moving from the West Coast. Moved there to pursue theater, and when she moved there, she joins this community-driven experimental theater troupe, which I'm not sure what that means, but it sounds very New York. Basically, she said they weren't getting paid for it. They all had regular jobs, but they were doing this for fun. They were doing it to get a leg up in the industry, and it was the kind of troupe that everybody knew everybody. They would sleep on each other's couches after rehearsals. They would all hang out together. It was very close-knit, and their personal lives sort of blended into their performances. And so 2 years after joining, this one older woman in the group, she said she was mid-50s at the time, so Abby's mid-30s. This woman named Rhonda is mid-50s. She's not super close with Rhonda. Rhonda is kind of coming and going from this theater group, but she finds out that Rhonda's roommate has passed away in her sleep. Apparently it was very sudden. There was no illness that anybody knew about, and the roommate was not part of the theater troupe. So nobody personally knew her, but they all felt bad for Rhonda because they were like, oh my gosh, how horrible is that? Rhonda misses a couple rehearsals. At the next one she comes back to, Abby goes over to her and she's like, I just want to offer my condolences. I'm so sorry to hear about your roommate. That's horrible. And Rhonda's like strangely upbeat. She's not manic, but she's light, and she jokes about it. And she's like, oh, people come and go. At least you went peacefully. Abby kind of clocks that as like a strange response, but she's like, everyone processes grief differently. Maybe she's like an upbeat person. 2 weeks later, Rhonda mentions to the group that she needs a new place to move in because she had been renting the room from the woman who passed away. And nobody else had a room, but Abby did have a room opening up in her apartment. And she was like, you know what? I need a roommate. I'm going to invite her to move in because it felt very communal. It felt very like New York, very theater energy. And so Rhonda moves in pretty quickly. Although she knew Rhonda for like 2 years at this point, like I said, they weren't close. So she's looking forward to like living with her, to having a more communal space. And she learns very quickly that Rhonda is working as a barista at a local coffee shop. Supposedly doesn't drink or garden. She's completely sober, but she's always coming and going at weird hours. But Abby just thinks this is because she's so well connected socially. She's not just part of this group. She's got like tons of other activities. She told Abby that she grew up in Brooklyn and had lived in New York her entire life and just had a ton of friends. Sometimes she comes and goes at like midnight, 4 a.m., at noon after she tells Abby that she had to wake up early to open the cafe. But Abby doesn't think much of it because she's like, people freelance and people have lives and a 9 to 5 doesn't really exist. At least in her social circle. But over time, Abby notices these weird inconsistencies with Rhonda, primarily dealing with her schedule and like her supposed job. Like Rhonda will say, again, a night before she's supposed to work, I have to go to bed early tonight. I have to be at the cafe at 6 a.m. And then at like 9 a.m., Abby will be in the kitchen and Rhonda comes walking out of her room and she'll be like, I thought you had to work. And Rhonda just says, no, somebody covered for me or they called me off. This happens a lot. Sometimes she'll leave saying she's going to work, but she's in clothes that like look like she's going out to the bars for the night. And it'll be like 9 p.m. She's like, you're about to start work at 9 p.m. And Rhonda just says, yeah, like, it's an overnight shift. I have to do stocking. Abby's like, okay, weird. Like she notices it, but rent's always paid. Rhonda doesn't seem to be a problem in any other way. So she's not like mad about it, but she's like curious. Like she thinks something's up. We said about a month and a half after Rhonda moved in, one night she was like tossing and turning, couldn't really sleep. She thought she heard Rhonda out like walking around the apartment, and it's dark in her room, completely dark. She said she had blackout curtains, and she turns over and she feels something on her face, like air. So she opens her eyes and she sees Rhonda's face like an inch above her own. She's like hovered over her as she's sleeping. So Abby's surprised. She screams. Rhonda jumps back. She's like, oh, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. Apologizing profusely, but then she starts laughing and she's like, I'm so sorry. I had a dream that you passed away in your sleep and I had to come in here and make sure that you were still alive. I had to check and make sure you were still breathing. Isn't that funny how our subconscious fears just manifest? Abby's like, what was that? So she tells Rhonda it's okay because it's never happened before, but she starts locking her door at night after that because she's like, I don't want this woman in my room. Said a couple weeks after that, so Rhonda's living there for like 2.5 months at this point. She notices that Rhonda left her keys on the counter after she had left for work. And Abby is going toward the coffee shop anyway. She has to run an errand. And so she's like, you know what? I'll just grab the keys. I'll drop off the keys at the coffee shop. Just a neighborly, like, roommate-y thing to do. So she walks in the coffee shop. She doesn't see Rhonda, so she goes up to the counter and she's like, hey, my roommate left these at home. And the barista's like, oh, who's your roommate? And she's like, Rhonda. And the barista looks at her strangely and she's like, Rhonda. She's like, we don't have anyone here named Rhonda. And she's like, no, she has told me the name of where she works before. Like, I know she works here. Can you just give her these keys? And so the barista takes the keys and she goes and talks to like the manager, and she comes back. She's like, no, my manager said that nobody has ever worked here by that name. My manager's been here for like 5 years. Abby's like, okay, weird. So she goes home, she takes the keys, and then when Rhonda gets home that night, she's like, she kind of gently confronts her. She's like, hey, you left your keys here. I tried to take them to you at work, but they said that you didn't work there. And Rhonda said, oh, I got reassigned to a different location today. Abby doesn't tell her that they had told her that like there was nobody by that name who had ever worked there. And Rhonda just continues like lying. She's like, well, everyone working must be new. We just hired like a ton of new staff for the season. But her tone wasn't like panicked. It was very calm and practiced. And Abby realized at that point that she was probably very good at lying. As time went on, she started noticing other subtle lies that Rhonda would tell. Like for instance, before Rhonda moved in, she had told Abby that she had been born and raised in Brooklyn and had grown up there. But later she tells Abby that she moved to New York when she was 40. Abby kind of called her out on it. She was like, oh, you told me that you were born and raised in Brooklyn. And Rhonda kind of backtracked. She was like, well, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, but then I moved away and then I moved back to New York when I was 40. Abby clocked that because she was like, I know that she told me before that she was born and raised in New York and had never lived anywhere else. She also tells Abby the same childhood story twice, but each time it has a different ending. She also woke up one night because she thought she heard someone trying to turn the doorknob to her bedroom, and she turned and looked and the door was wiggling. So Rhonda must have been on the outside of the door trying to get in her bedroom, but she just pretended like she was asleep and her door was locked. Another night she was laying there and she said that she hadn't completely gone to bed. Like she was laying on her phone or like watching something, and her door wasn't locked and the door was cracked open, but she was faced away from the door, and she noticed like a shadow came and casted a light over from where the hallway light was shining. So she turns and she sees Rhonda standing in the doorway, peeking in through the little crack. Then came the jars. She said one day she went into Rhonda's room when she was supposedly at work because she needed to borrow a laptop charger. Hers had stopped working, and she noticed there was like a bunch of little glass jars filled with a dark red liquid that she assumed was, and she asked Rhonda about it later on. She was like, hey, I was in your room earlier borrowing your laptop charger. I noticed those jars. What is it? Is that actually what I think it is? And Rhonda says, yeah, but it's fake. It's for stage prop for the play that I'm working on. I'm helping with like the set design. And Abby knows that they're in the same thing and they're not doing anything with fake blood. Rhonda is home less and less, but when she is home and when her and Abby do interact, their conversations are getting stranger. She starts asking Abby all about her energy levels. She asks her if she's menstruating. Asks her about her dreams, if she's sleeping well, and all about her health. And Abby thinks it's very weird and like too personal. And she kind of just tells Rhonda gently, like, I'm not really comfortable discussing all of that with you. Rhonda kind of gets mad about it, and she's like, I just feel like as your roommate, I deserve to know when you're menstruating so that I can like tiptoe around you. That same night at like 8:30 p.m., Rhonda gets dressed up like she's going out in the town, and she tells Abby she's going to work. And Abby's like, you know what, I have nothing to do. So she decides she's going to follow her that night. That she watched her walk like 4 blocks away from a distance, and she stops in the street and she picks up a pigeon. The pigeon doesn't struggle or fight or anything, and Rhonda puts it in her pocket. She disappears down an alley about a block away from there and through an unmarked door. She said it wasn't like a bar, it wasn't like anything like that. It was nothing that was marked from the outside. She doesn't know what it was, but she didn't follow. She was like, I felt really uncomfortable, really creeped out, so I just went home, but I had a hard time sleeping that night. Rhonda comes home that night at like 5 a.m. Abby wakes up, goes out in the kitchen when she comes in, and she notices Rhonda looks like very disheveled, very dirty. She's like, how was work? And Rhonda was just like, it was a really hard shift. About another month goes by, and Rhonda is becoming increasingly obsessed with Abby's routine, her health, her menstruation. She wants to know exactly what time Abby thinks she falls asleep and wakes up. And when Abby asks why, Rhonda says, I think I could help you sleep better if I could help you track your sleep cycles. She's also constantly asking her if she feels lightheaded or hollow. She starts touching Abby more. Like all of a sudden she becomes this very touchy-feely person where anytime they're passing each other in the hallway, she'll like lightly brush her wrist or her elbow or her shoulder. She starts to touch her hair while they're talking. She says she woke up one night, went out to use the bathroom because it was like a 2-bed, 1-bath. She came out and she heard something coming from Rhonda's room. She believes that Rhonda was in the room chanting something. She couldn't make out what it was, but it was very low and it was something repetitive. She says, I don't know why of everything that happened, that creeped me out the most. But at that point, I believed that she was trying to like do something or take something from me, not like money, like something else, something worse. It's part 2 of, I think my roommate was trying to drain my life force. I just posted the first part. I'm sorry, it got really, really long and there's a cutoff, so I had to make a part 2. I hardly do that, but go watch that one if you haven't. So anyway, after Rhonda's asking Abby all about her menstruation schedule, her sleep schedule, lying constantly about her job and everything like that, Abby is very unsettled. She's losing sleep over it. She's constantly thinking that she's overanalyzing everything that Rhonda does, and she's waking up drained. She has like small bruises all over her body, and she just thinks it's like lack of sleep, and it's like making her crazy. And so she goes to work one day. She's telling her coworker all about Rhonda and her theater troupe, and her coworker doesn't know Rhonda, doesn't know anyone in their theater troupe, and her coworker is like, this is not normal, you should start documenting everything. And Abby's like, well, she's not doing anything illegal, she's just like really creepy. And her roommate's like, no, this is not normal, like you need to document everything and you need to tell the landlord in case you need to evict her, because at this point Rhonda had been on the lease. Abby starts documenting everything, and she's just quietly trying to plan her escape from Rhonda. A few weeks after that, she goes to one of the rehearsals for the theater troupe that they were in. This rehearsal takes place. Rhonda hadn't been home in like 4 days, but Abby was relieved to have a little break from her. And so when Rhonda shows up to the rehearsal, Abby's face kind of goes like solemn. And one of the other members of the theater troupe, who knows both of them, kind of looks at Abby. She's like, is everything okay? It seems like there's a wedge between you two. And Abby's just like, can we go out after the rehearsal? Like, I have some stuff to tell you. And she unloads everything that's been going on at home about Rhonda. Like, she doesn't want to stir up drama in this theater troupe, but she's also like, I have to tell somebody that also knows her. This girl's face goes solemn, and she's like, you know, I don't like drama either. I don't want to stir up anything. I think that we have a really great thing with this theater troupe, but there's this guy named Mike that I feel like you need to talk to. He was Rhonda's old roommate before she lived with the girl that passed away. And Abby's like, who's Mike? And she's like, well, he was like a lighting director. He used to work with us. He doesn't really work with our theater troupe anymore after his falling out with Rhonda, but like, I still know him. I can put you guys in contact. And Abby's like, okay, yeah, I'd like to meet him. So she calls him one day out of the blue. She's like, I know this is really weird. I just wanted to ask you some questions about someone named Rhonda. I guess you used to live with her. And the guy gets like super serious on the phone. He's like, yeah, I'll meet up with you. I'd love to talk about her. Like, are you free tomorrow? Like, I can talk to you tomorrow. And she's like, yeah. So they agree. They go meet at this bar. Shows up, he seems normal, he's like polite, grounded, he doesn't seem like over the top. Like she said, a lot of the people in this theater troupe she was part of, he almost seems to be embarrassed, like gossiping about Rhonda, but he's like, I just feel like it's important, like if you're living with her, that you know who she really is as a person. Like, she's a pathological liar. He's like, I lived with her for 6 months, and at first she seemed maybe a little odd, but she was helpful around the house, she always paid her rent. He's like, but she got way too into my business. She was asking me all kinds of questions about my health, stayed up all night. She did not have a job, even though she always paid rent. One night he woke up in the middle of the night to find her sitting on the edge of his bed, and he said she wasn't touching him or anything like that, but he was startled. He woke up, he was like, what are you doing? And she said that she was concerned about his breathing. She was concerned that he was going to pass away in his sleep, and she was just making sure that he was still breathing. He tells her that Rhonda said that she needed to check to make sure he didn't have sleep apnea and that his breathing was normal. He told her that after that night he started feeling weak and disoriented all the time. He would wake up with bruises. He started feeling sick all the time, and he couldn't prove it, and he never caught her in his room again, but he felt like she had something to do with it. And then came the breaking point. Said he came home from work early one night to find her standing in his room. She hadn't broken anything or stolen anything. She was standing in his room looking in the mirror, and he walked in his room and was like startled to see her in there. But she's standing in the mirror, which I guess she can see his reflection standing in the doorway, and she's whispering his name, Michael, 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 over and over again. I was like, what are you doing? And he said she didn't flinch, she didn't turn around, she didn't change her tone at all. She just said, you don't need all of it. He said, I didn't have any idea what she was talking about, but I just felt off about it. He said, basically, I'm a level-headed guy, but that was too creepy for me. I asked her to move out. She just said, thank you for our time, and she moved out within the week. Abby's leaving from meeting Mike. He basically tells her, like, you need to get her out of your space. She's not a safe person. I can't prove it, but she's just not safe, and you should be done with her. So Abby decides that's enough. She has had too many weird instances with Rhonda. After this conversation with Mike, she's just done with her, and she realizes she has to ask Rhonda to move out. She does. Rhonda actually takes it well. She doesn't get angry or anything like that. She says, I'm glad for the time that we got to spend together. She says, if it's not too much trouble, will you just tell me when you last menstruated? Abby's like, no. And Rhonda says, okay. And she said she moved out within the month. There was no fight. There was no big blowout. Nothing happened. Rhonda continued coming to the theater troupe, though, after she moved out. She said she just treated Abby like she never knew her really at all. She would be polite with her, never made an effort to talk about it with her or show her any kind of closeness or like warmth. Eventually, she just stopped coming to rehearsals, and nobody in the theater troupe knows what happened to her. Abby says she never really found out what Rhonda was up to. She said, I fully believe that whatever she was doing when she lived with Mike, whatever she was doing when she lived with that girl who passed away, and whatever she was doing with me was related. She said she shared this story because she was curious as to what you all thought about what Rhonda was really up to. She says she doesn't really know anything about other types of practices, especially dealing with pigeons or jars of blood or asking someone when they're menstruating. So if you have any thoughts for her, let her know. All the names in the story have been changed, by the way. If you have a creepy roommate story, we would love to hear it.
She warned us to never ever call her name when the clock strikes 2 a.m. I did, and she was never the same. Tell me why. I could see her in the mirror, but when I turn around, she's nowhere to be seen. Story time. So one morning, we woke up to find this strange looking girl laid on our doorstep. She looked dirty, very frightened. She looked as if someone was after her. My parents tried getting answers, but she wouldn't talk. So, being kind as they are, they offered she could live with us until she can go back to where she comes from. So, after a while, she started opening up to me. And then one day, as we were start doing our chores, she told me something very strange and chilling. Something I never paid much attention to. She said, when the clock strikes at 2 a.m., you are never ever to call my name. I thought, who would want to be calling anyone at that hour of the morning when people are sleeping? So I didn't pay much attention to it. I just brushed it off. Fast forward, I was walking up exactly 2 a.m. to some sounds coming from her room. I couldn't sleep, so I decided to go and check. When I went in her room, tell me why she wasn't in the bed. I proceeded to go to the bathroom. When I got there, she wasn't there, but something very strange was happening. The shower was left on. It was as if someone was having a shower. So I turned it off, and when I went to leave, I saw her laid on her bed. Remember, she wasn't there before when I went in the room. But something very, very weird, creepy about the way she was laid. Her eyes were wide open. When I got closer, I waved. No response. I started shaking her. No response. Then I panicked and I started calling her name. Still no response. I got scared and I thought maybe she might be deep in her sleep, and I left the room. Next morning, we woke up and she wasn't up. I went to check. She was still laid there in the exact same position when I left her at 2 a.m. I panicked, and when I told my parents, they checked. She's not breathing, and they took her to the hospital. When they got there, she was pronounced dead. My parents rang me to tell me. I went to brush my teeth. Tell me why. I could see her in the mirror while I'm brushing my teeth. But when I turned to look, she's nowhere to be seen. This freaked me out. I ran out of the house and waited for my parents to return back. I told them what I saw. My parents said, we need to pray. I then told my parents what she had told me about calling her name at 2 a.m. in the morning, which I did because I panicked. My parents said there's something not quite right about her. What do you think she is or was? If you think you know, please, I'd like for you to drop it in the comment section below. I will be reading them all, and it's much appreciated. Thank you.
We're keeping them going. I got another creepy story time from Rob, the search and rescue officer. Don't mind the holiday look. I gotta go to a Christmas party, but I wanted to get a story in quick. Rob says that he had gotten a report that an elderly lady had fainted near one of the trails. They needed assistance getting back to the main area, and they hike up to the spot, and the husband is standing there just beside himself. His wife was hanging out at the trail, and he went off a little bit to go look at something, and all of a sudden he starts hearing her screaming frantically. He says by the time he gets to her, she's just passed out on the ground. So they get her on a backboard and they start making their way down to the main center. All of a sudden, on the journey, she wakes up and starts screaming again. Once they finally calm her down, they ask her what the heck happened. She said she was standing there waiting for her husband to come back, and all of a sudden, she started to hear a strange sound. She said it sounded sort of like a cat, but it was off somehow. She said she walked ahead a little bit to see if she could hear it better, and then she started hearing it come closer towards her. She said she just got this really uneasy feeling when she started to realize that it wasn't quite a cat. It was almost like a man trying to say meow like a cat, but in a really weird monotone voice. It was just meow, 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 over and over again. But she said it wasn't a man. It couldn't have been, because she has never heard a man's voice buzz the way that it did. It was almost like a mechanical sound. She said it just kept getting louder and louder, coming closer and closer. And then she saw a figure coming out of the trees, but by now it was a blur, and she passed out. So they're thinking, why the heck would some random person just be hiding out in the woods meowing at people? Let's say it was a person. So Rob's like, I'm gonna go back out there and check out the scene. So now that they're safe and everybody's back to the center, Rob takes his walkie out and he makes his way back out to the trail, and he starts to search around. He said by now it's kind of getting to be dusk, and he didn't really want to be out there for too long by himself. So he started to, after a little while, chalk it up to, you know what, this is a lost cause. I'm gonna turn around and go back. So on the way back, Rob says he starts to hear something in the distance. So he turns around and he yells out for anybody who's out there to identify themselves. And then he heard it. It was a deep, monotone man's guttural meow with like a really mechanical sound to it. He said it was coming from all around him. It wasn't getting closer or louder. It was just happening all around him. He said he never did find out what it was, that eventually it just faded out, but he just turned around and went back. He said he's also never had reports since then. Who knows, man? Some creepy stuff going on out in the forests. Let me know your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned because I'm sure I've got a couple more from Rob. We are really on a roll with these creepy search and rescue stories from Rob. At this point, I'm going to make a playlist on my page so you can easily listen to all of them. So for this story, Rob says that this is by far the scariest thing that's ever happened to him. He said in his field, you never want to let yourself get freaked out about being alone in the woods, but sometimes certain things happen that you can't shake. He says sometimes it's just easier to forget about these experiences and move on. This is the only thing that's ever happened to him that actually made him question whether or not being a search and rescue officer was right for him. He said it was the end of spring and he got a typical lost child call. It was a 4-year-old little girl who wandered away from her campsite. Rob said that the parents said what a lot of parents of missing children say, and it's not like her to wander off like that. Rob and his team said that they will do everything they can for her, and they start their search and they spread out in their usual formation. Rob said for this search, he had been partnered up with one of his good buddies. They searched for over 2 hours and they were way further away than where they think this girl could even be, but they just kept pushing anyway. He said then they came out of a small valley and something happened that made them both stop in unison. They freeze and then a sensation rolls over both of them, almost like a plane depressurizing. Rob said then his ears popped and then he had the sensation wash over him like he was free falling 10 feet. He looks at his buddy and goes to ask him if he felt the same thing too. And then he said the loudest sound he's ever heard in his life just hit them out of nowhere. He said it was almost like the sound of a freight train just zooming right by them, but obviously there's nothing in sight. He also said that the sound was coming from every direction all around them. It was coming from every direction, including above and below them. And his buddy yells out something to him, but he cannot hear him over this deafening roar. They're freaked out. They're looking all around. And one of the thoughts that popped into Rob's head was possible landslide, but they weren't even close to any areas that could even be happening. He said, and even if it were, it would have hit him by now, judging by how loud this sound was. He said this sound went on, and they are literally standing together, yelling to each other, trying to communicate, and no one can hear a single thing except for this horrible sound. He says, and then as quickly as it came on, it just stopped like a light switch. They were trying to collect their thoughts and slowly the sounds of the forest and the nature started to come back in. So his friend asks him, what the F just happened? And he just shrugs. He has no idea. And then they took the radio and they called in to the other people in the surrounding area who were absolutely within earshot, who should have been able to hear what they heard. And nobody else knew what they were talking about. Nobody heard it but Rob and his partner. So they just shrug it off and they keep searching, and another hour goes by and then they radio in to see, and nobody else has found her. He said at this point it's getting dark and they normally don't continue searching in the dark, but since no one has any leads or anything and time is of the essence, they decide, you know what, we're just gonna keep on looking for this poor girl. So they keep walking in the dark. They're yelling out for her every few seconds and just nothing. And they feel so sad right now because it is terrifying to be lost alone in the woods. And then when it's dark out, it's just a whole new type of fear. But at this point, it's past midnight and they think it's time to turn around and go back to the rendezvous point. So Rob and his partner are about halfway back at this point, and his buddy shines his flashlight over to the side. He illuminates a really thick deadfall or a group of dead trees. Rob's like, did you hear something? And his buddy's like, hold on a second. They're both listening intently now, and then they hear it. There is a faint sound of a child crying in the distance. So they are headed around the deadfall now, following the sound of this distant crying, and they kept on calling this girl's name, and they didn't get a response other than just that sound of crying. So they're getting closer and closer now, and as they approach, Rob says he got this really horrendous gut feeling. He told his buddy about it, and this guy said that he was feeling the same way. Something was just wrong. So they stop dead in their tracks. They call this girl one more time, and then they figure out what's wrong. He said that the crying sound was on a loop. He said it started out with a little hitching sob, then a loud wail, and then a hiccup of silence, and then it would loop over and play again. And this identical loop repeated over and over and over. He said it was the exact same sound every single time, and without even communicating it to each other, they just both took off running. Rob said that that was the only time he's lost his composure like that, but he knows in his gut that something was about to go incredibly wrong. He said that they finally got back to the rendezvous point and they asked the others if they heard anything or saw anything weird, and no one else had anything to report. And unfortunately, no one has ever found that little girl. He says they keep an eye out for her as they do with any other person that's ever gone missing and not been found, but he says he doubts that they're ever going to find her. So freaking sad. Let me know what you think it could have been. It's a really freaking weird situation. And stay tuned because I believe we'll have more from Rob.
Scary story time at 3 a.m. Appalachian Mountain Edition while I make slime. For those of you who did not know, I also make YouTube videos, scary story time YouTube videos. So yeah, currently making one now. Get your money's worth and let it drain. Monica and her best friend rented a cabin for her birthday. Now, when they arrived, everything was nice. The trail was nice. They had a fun time. But this specific cabin had an outhouse. So, unfortunately, at around 1:30 a.m., Monica had to use the bathroom pretty badly. She's scared, but of course she goes to use the bathroom. And as she's going, she's in complete darkness. And she hears her best friend's voice saying, "Come here." Same pitch, same slang, everything. But she whispered it. So Monica responds back like, "Girl, what? Like, I'm using the bathroom." And then the voice laughed. And it was her exact laugh, but it kind of echoed. And it was weird because it like echoed too many times. And then the voice said, "Come here. I need your help. Like, come to the trees." And that's when she realized the best friend's voice wasn't coming from the cabin. It was coming from the tree line. She sprinted to the freaking cabin because she thinking that her best friend need help or her best friend got kidnapped or something. And that's when she found her best friend passed out. She was snoring, drooling, probably having a good old dream before she went up in there and scared her awake. She was screaming. She woke up her best friend. Her best friend's like, "Girl, what's wrong? What's going on?" And that's when she said, "Girl, oh my gosh." She said, "Girl," like, she told her everything that happened basically. And her best friend was like, "Girl, I've been in here the whole time. Like, I wasn't pranking you. Like, I've been in here the whole time." So when they told the cabin owner the next morning, the cabin owner was like, "Well, yeah, the trees echo what you fear at night. So that's why the locals don't go out at night." As a matter of fact, why did you even let me, why wouldn't you tell me the rules? If you knew this, why wouldn't you tell me before, man, I'm stuttering. But why wouldn't you tell me the rules? And then why would you have an outhouse knowing that I'm not supposed to be going outside at night? That don't even make no sense. I'm not supposed to be going outside at night and you got an outhouse. Man, this is rigged. I blame the owner.
Let's read another scary skinwalker story. I decided to join my bestie Karen for a 3-day stay at her grandmother's place on the res. Her grandmother lives near a place called Tuba City, Arizona, in the middle of nowhere but surrounded by rural homes. We go to college together and I was kind of interested to know about Navajo tradition. The first day we stayed, it was pretty chill, nothing out of the ordinary, but then her grandma said that a stray dog came out of nowhere and wouldn't leave. To me, it did act kind of strange and was ugly looking. Black, shaggy coat, looked like a mix between a German Shepherd and a lab. That night, we were watching a movie in the living room with the curtains wide open. Grandma was in the kitchen cooking dinner and we were watching a movie. Next to the window is a medium-sized bookshelf and where DVDs are kept. Karen went to put back a DVD we had just watched, but she freaked out because that stray black dog was staring at us through the window, standing on top of the wood box outside. Not something normal dogs do from my point of view or hers. The other dogs seemed to stay away from it. Karen opened the door and yelled at it to get off the box. It ran off behind the shed. We went to Tuba City to get some groceries, came back to the house. The dog was nowhere to be seen, nothing unusual. Grandma went to visit some people, so it was just Karen and I. About 5 o'clock, we heard someone trying to open the door. Both of us looked outside since there had been no car heard and no dogs barking. Looking out the living room window to the door, and there was the dog trying to open the door with its paws. 2 paws wrapped around the brass doorknob, standing on its hind legs. I thought that was weird, but wasn't really freaked out. Karen was, though. She opened the door and chased it off. Grandma came back later, and Karen told her what happened. Grandma didn't like what she heard. We got ready to go to sleep. We slept in the spare bedroom since it had 2 beds. One window with curtains, opened just a little. We turned off the light, but there was a sound coming from on top of the roof. Pitter-patter footsteps and scratching sounds and panting. It then sounded like it jumped off onto the large plastic water barrel they had. At first we heard what sounded like barking, but as it grew louder, the other dogs seemed to be barking at something also. But all of a sudden, something was running around the house barking, and it was no dog. Nope, it wasn't. This barking sounded human, a deep male voice barking like it knew that we knew that it wasn't a dog. Karen decided to open the curtains to look out. There was the stray dog on its hind legs looking into our bedroom, but this time it stunk. And what I thought were 2 black holes in the neck, another pair of eyes twinkled, and the paws were deformed looking hands with overgrown, somewhat thick and sharp fingernails. Again, both screaming and shutting the curtains closed. Grandma comes running through the door and she sees it. First thing she did was grab ashes from the fireplace, load 3 shells into the shotgun from under her bed, bless herself in Navajo, and went outside to shoot it, yelling in Navajo about how the thing wasn't welcome there and to get the hell out of there for it to go linger somewhere else. Them both being traditional, the next day they called a medicine man to come over and put cedar in. He prayed over everyone with cedar smoke and an eagle feather, blessed the place. He made us eat bitter herbs called eagle's gull or something like that, and gave me an arrowhead. Apparently I needed to carry one for protection and a little pouch called corn pollen. Seems to work pretty well. The medicine man said that the dog was a skinwalker, which in Navajo is a long word, but I call them Yoshis. The body of a stray dog, which was unalived by the skinwalker, made an illusion so we wouldn't know it was a real dog. He also said that Yoshis tend to harm people by using some sort of human bone straw to spit at someone. Doctors can't detect it, but the medicine man that day pulled a piece of human skull out of Grandma's right shoulder, pretty big, about 2 inches long and 1 centimeter thick. It was real because we watched him pull it out of her. That was intense. This is one of the stories that I included in my podcast episode that comes out tonight at midnight. So if you want to hear more spooky skinwalker stories, be sure to listen to my podcast tomorrow.
This girl saw something near a reservation that she will never be able to forget, and I do not blame her one bit. This story is terrifying. A little backstory, Misty has lived her whole entire life on her family's generational property. Now, there's tons of land, and most of it is open fields, and it used to be in the middle of nowhere. Now that and the surrounding towns are super populated and industrialized. There's lots of new office buildings, malls, houses, etc. But a few years ago, her family's property became the last bit of woods or inhabitable area that wildlife could live around there. Now, during this time that this was all going on, Misty was struggling a little bit. Because she was struggling so much, I think she attracted something pretty negative because she was going through a lot. So one night, Misty is laying in bed in her bedroom, and suddenly she starts to fall asleep, and then she hears tap, 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 tap on her bedroom window. So she's like, oh my god, what the hell is outside of my window? When suddenly she hears and sounded exactly like somebody had taken their nails and just scratched outside of her window. And then she just hears this shriek come from outside. So she is beside herself at this point. She is terrified, and unfortunately, this would become a regular thing. She would go to bed at night, she would hear scratching, she would hear screaming, she would wake up the next day and she would have marks all over her body and constantly hearing inaudible voices. And because of all of this that's going on, she's having a hard time because she can't sleep, she can't think. It's just scaring her all the time. Well, she's 13 years old now. now, and her friends are having a sleepover, and they're sleeping in the guest house that is on her family's property. So they start settling down for the night, and she realizes that they need more bed sheets. So she has to go outside and go walk to her family's house to get more bed sheets from her parents. So she walks outside, she starts going towards her house, she turns to her right for a second, and she sees something standing in the middle of the field. So she's looking at it, and she's like, what is that? And then she realizes it looks just like her dad. It has the same haircut as her dad. It's dressed like her dad. It's as tall as her dad, except she looks closer and it has no face. So it wasn't just smoothed over. Oh no, it looked like it had been taken off and then healed again, if you can picture that. So she could see eye sockets, the shape of the skull, and there was like skin stretched over it. So at this point she obviously bolts inside because she is terrified, because this thing is literally just standing there staring at her like this, like off in the woods behind a barbed wire fence. So she runs inside and she tells her mom, I just saw a man like with no face. He looked just like dad, except for he had no face, and the face was just wrong. So her brother hears that she saw this, and him, I guess, and his friends decide that they're gonna go outside and they're gonna go look for this thing. So they go outside, and apparently it was raining at the time, and she said that they could not find anything. They couldn't even find shoe prints in the mud where this thing was standing. She said that she has never seen this thing again, and that she does have an idea of what she thinks that it was. I cannot say it. There are two different things that she thinks it may be, and I can't say either of them. I wouldn't say one of them even if I could, just out of respect for the Navajo culture. But so she thinks that one of them, it may be that, or it may be something that impersonates, people. So what do you guys think about that story? I do not like the face thing. It really freaked me out. I'm sorry, but seeing someone that, I don't know what's worse. Would it be worse for you to see someone that looked like your relative but with their face, knowing it's not them, or just seeing them with like a face like that? I genuinely don't know which one would freak me out more. And I'm sorry, you guys, if that was like a short story and if I didn't tell it the best. I am so sick right now. I didn't even post anything for work today because I'm so sick. I have the worst sore throat, and my whole entire body hurts. My head hurts. I'm so tired. I literally slept till like 4 o'clock in the afternoon today. I could not even get out of bed, and that is not like me at all. So I feel like, oh God. And I'm going to Florida to visit my family for Christmas on Wednesday, and I do not want to be sick like this when I go and visit them. But anyways, now that I've complained, you guys can drop all your thoughts, opinions, and suggestions down in the comments, but please, as always, be respectful.
This man is one of the most dangerous black magic users ever. His name is Al-Hussein Al-Falaki, and in the late 80s, everyone in Egypt feared him because he was known for his black magic and contact with jinns. The reason why he terrorized Egypt and he's known for that is because this man low-key didn't give a fuck. You know when somebody does a bad thing, well, he tries to hide it. This man didn't. Everybody knew that he was specialized in summoning jinns and communicating with them, binding objects to spirits, and doing talismans and rituals. Basically black magic. And he used to do all this in his apartment, aka office. Now, after hearing all this, there is a question that comes in mind. Why can't people stop him? Good luck with that. First of all, nobody is trying to be cursed, respectfully. Second thing is, he was too far to be saved. Everybody knew that this will end badly. The stuff he's doing are too dangerous even for an expert. And without any surprise, something shocking happened to him. But before telling you what happened, let me tell you that this man made cash. Unlike other magicians, Al-Hussein Al-Falaki was so quiet, so calm, and educated. If I had to describe him with a word that we will use this day, I would say nonchalant. Not even joking. And this right here will get him so known and trusted. It got to a point where he didn't accept middle-class people anymore. All his clients were known actors, businessmen, and politicians. If an actor secretly went to his apartment tonight and paid him well, this man will do his thing, he will do his black magic, and that actor will win an Oscar tomorrow. That's how good he was. Now, many people say that working with jinns is dangerous but possible, but you should never try to control them, and this man crossed the line. In 2003, he was found unalived in his own apartment. Oh, bro, maybe he suffered from something, or basically a failure, like heart attack got him. No. His face was frozen in terror, like it saw something. His eyes were wide open, and his jaw was broken. The most important detail in all of this was his apartment door. What about it? It was locked from the inside. If somebody unalived him, how can he lock the door of his apartment from the inside? After a long investigation, still nobody knows how this happened. He had no medical condition, nobody did this to him, and he didn't do it to himself. So his case was officially listed as unclear, but people around him were saying one thing. The jinn collected their debt.
I currently live in Jacksonville, Florida with my aunt, so I don't get to see my parents often, but I lived in Haiti for 14 years. My country is known for its strong connection to the afterlife and voodoo practices. My family is very religious, especially my mom, who can actually feel and see things. One night, after praying with my mom and sister over the phone, I went straight to bed. I wasn't sleepy yet, so I scrolled on Instagram while my sister slept next to me. I eventually fell asleep around 1:30 a.m., and that night I happened to be sleeping on my back. About 5-10 minutes into my sleep, I felt myself lying on the bed next to my sister, but I couldn't move. I tried speaking, even screaming, but nothing came out. I couldn't tell if I was awake or dreaming, but I knew for sure that my body was asleep. Suddenly, the figure of a little girl started forming in front of me. She stood at the foot of the bed, just staring at me. I closed my eyes, hoping I would snap out of it and wake up, but it didn't work. I finally gathered the courage to look at her again, but her face was so blurry, I couldn't make out any features. I started praying Psalm 91, the same prayer my mom taught me to say every night. As soon as I began the prayer, the girl disappeared, and I woke up. I was shaken, but also relieved, because God is good. This is just one of my stories. I have more, if you like to hear them.
My name is Izzy and I'm from Beverley, near Hull. This story happened in Maghall in Liverpool. A few years ago, I went to go and stay with my grandparents over the summer. I was only there for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Everything was going great. But some backstory to this. Since being very young, I can always remember hearing footsteps on the landing upstairs during the day and also at night. However, we have a big family and I thought that it was probably one of my siblings just going to the toilet. On week 2 of my stay, I'd gotten into bed and was scrolling on my phone. It must have been about 1:30 a.m. and both of my grandparents were asleep. I'd started to feel sleep take over, so I turned around and put my phone on the nightstand, turned the lamp off. I'd just turned back over and was about to fall asleep when I heard footsteps. Not thinking anything of it, I shut my eyes and tried to get comfortable. And that was until I heard tapping on the wardrobe. I stilled my breathing and tried to listen carefully. The tapping sounded like it was moving along the wardrobe, getting closer to me each time, until it stopped. At this point, I was wide awake and I had tried to stay as still as possible until I felt something leaning on the bed over me. The mattress actually sunk as if someone was getting into bed. I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me until whatever was leaning on the bed got up and I heard the footsteps leave the room and go back down the hallway. The next morning I decided not to say anything to my grandparents as I thought I was just overtired and my mind was playing tricks on me. At around lunchtime, both my grandparents left the house to run some errands, so I was in my room drawing, listening to music. Around half an hour after they left, I heard a huge bang downstairs, so I ran to the kitchen to find every cupboard door flung open. I quickly shut them all and made my way back upstairs, trying not to think about it. This proceeded to happen a second time, no more than 20 minutes after the first. I decided to shut the doors again and talk to my grandma about it. That night at tea, I brought it up in conversation, and to my surprise, they were extremely calm about it. My grandma explained to me that it was Neil. He was probably throwing a tantrum due to the fact that he hadn't left the radio on. I proceeded to ask who Neil was, and my grandma began to explain. Neil was a teenage boy who used to live in the house before my grandparents moved in. Unfortunately, he passed away at quite a young age due to having cancer. My grandparents had bought the house from his family and had helped them move his tree from the back garden to the new house. Since then, my grandparents have said that they would hear footsteps. Pictures would be tilted or fall off the wall. Cupboard doors would open and many other strange occurrences would happen. To my surprise, my grandma said that she'd never felt scared, and he'd just become a part of their everyday life. When I asked about the bedroom incident, her reply was, "Oh, that used to be his room. He's probably just excited about having a girl in there." Neil has now become someone we talk about often in this family, and whenever I stay over, I always make sure to say hello and goodbye to him, and I never forget to turn the radio on. I hope you enjoyed my story, and I can't wait to hear it if it gets chosen for the pod. Oh, wow. Keep bringing laughter and spooky stories, and I can't wait to continue to listen in the future. Lots of love, Izzy.
So I found this video in Spanish, and it's of people experiencing weird shit while they're dreaming. So I'm gonna try to translate it to the best of my ability. possibility, but they're definitely creepy as fuck. So one girl was dreaming and she said that this lady wouldn't turn to look at her, so she says, hey, show me your face. And that this lady in a very demonic voice tells her,
do you think God would allow me to do that?
This next lady said that she was pregnant. In her dream, her sister was asking to take her baby. She tells her sister, no, I know this is a dream and I know that you're not my sister. Her sister's face changes, looks at her and said, I thought you weren't gonna figure it out. What the fuck? This girl said that she was almost like lucid dreaming and her mother-in-law was taking her by the hand and walking away with her, and that's when she remembered that her mother-in-law was passed away. Didn't say anything out loud, but her mother-in-law turned back to look at her and said, oh, you figured it out, didn't you? Bitch, what? I don't like those dreams. This guy was having a really fucked up dream and he said, I know this is a nightmare, I just want to wake up. And that's when a dream character turns to him and says, this may not be real for you, but it's real for us. Bitch, I don't give a fuck. I would still want to wake up. What do you mean? He responds to them, no, this is a dream, this is fake. This man ends up having 5 false awakes. Like he wakes up, thinks, oh, I've woken up. No, still a dream. Wakes up again. Okay, finally, I'm out of the dream. No, he's still dreaming. 5 fucking times. I would have gone crazy. This girl was having a dream and something really weird happened and it made her say out loud in her dream, well, thank God this is a dream. All of a sudden, this girl grabs her by the arm really hard and it hurt. And the pain is what made her wake up. She still had that pain in her arm when she was awake and no longer dreaming. This guy was saying that he was walking down a street in his dream where there was a lot of light posts, and with his hands he would turn them on or off. He knew he was dreaming. Somebody came up to him and said, why are you doing that? And he said, because I can. And that the person responded, or because we allow you to. Cool. This girl says that every time she has a lucid dream and she knows that she's dreaming, she asks her dream characters what time is it, because she enjoys the fact that it twists all of their faces and it's almost like they all glitch. She knows that it could be wrong, but she can't help herself and will continue to do it. This guy says that he was in a dream and that he was laughing and then almost kind of like woke up and realized it was a dream. So out loud he was like, oh, good thing this is just a dream. And all of the dream characters were like, no, this is real, this is real life. And he was like, no, count your fingers, I bet you can. And that they all tried to count their fingers and that they all started getting distorted and like couldn't count. I really hope when I go to bed tonight and I dream that I don't ask anybody to count their fingers or what time is it, because I swear I tell myself, don't do that. Dream Letty? Yeah, that bitch is too eager to do everything. I don't know. Anyway, what do you guys think? Have you ever gone through something like this? Hopefully not.
This teacher grooms her 15-year-old student into a relationship and then convinces him to end her husband's life. So the woman's name is Pamela Smart. She's a 22-year-old high school teacher living in New Hampshire with her husband, Greg, who is 24. And one day she comes home from work, she walks into her house, and immediately something feels off because the place is completely ransacked. And she's standing there frozen thinking, oh my God, my house has just been robbed. But then an even more terrifying thought hits her. What if whoever did this is still inside of the house somewhere, just waiting for her to walk inside so that they can attack her? So not wanting to alert anyone of her presence, she moves as slowly as possible into the apartment to try to investigate. But the moment that she turns the corner, she sees something that makes her scream at the top of her lungs, because right in front of her is her husband, Greg, lying dead in a pool of his own blood. And from the looks of it, he's been shot in the back of the head. And obviously she's freaking terrified. She can't stop crying and shaking, but she eventually manages to pull herself together and run to her neighbor's house to call for help. Or at least that's how her version of the story went down. Because the actual truth of what happened is completely different from what this woman told everyone. Also that she can make herself look like the victim. So Pamela and her husband Greg had been together for a few years now, and they had just gotten married like 7 months prior, but the cracks in their relationship were already showing. Like that honeymoon phase ended quick, because basically one night, just a few months into their marriage, Greg sits her down with this serious look on his face and he goes, hey babe, so bad news, I had a one-night stand, sorry about that. Maybe not in those exact words, but you get the idea. And understandably, Pamela is absolutely pissed, but at the same time she's completely heartbroken. Like she's sitting there crying, asking him, what did I do wrong to make you cheat on me? Did you ever even love me, or has this whole thing been a lie from the start? And at some point she starts seriously thinking about leaving him and ending the marriage right there, but then something shifts in her mind and she's like, wait a minute, I can't leave him just yet. not before I make him pay for what he did to me. So instead of confronting the situation head on like a normal person would, Pamela decides to play this avoidant game, thinking that maybe if I just weren't around, then absence will make my husband's heart grow fonder and he won't cheat on me again, or whatever that saying is. So she starts spending all of her time at school, picking up extra assignments that she could find, volunteering for committees that she doesn't even care about, basically doing whatever she can just to avoid being at home with Greg. And because of this new schedule, she is now spending way more time around her students than she ever did before. So much time that it actually started getting to her head in the worst way possible. Because at some point, these teenage boys start looking older to her, more mature, more attractive. And I'm not sure how, but I guess it makes sense in her messed up brain. And then at some point, Pamela starts volunteering for this school group called Project Self-Esteem, which is exactly where one student in particular catches her eye. A little boy named Billy Flynn, who is 15 years old. Yes, I know, disgusting. And she knows that he's younger than her. She knows that this is very wrong in every possible level, but apparently that doesn't stop her from looking. And I would normally say, hey, whatever floats your boat, but not when that boat is sailing directly towards a child. Anyways, they start talking, and at first it's just a very innocent chit chat where he mentions that he's into heavy metal bands, and she's like, oh my god, me too, I love heavy metal, which is apparently all it takes to make her start lusting even more. So much so that she starts going out of her way to spend even more time at work, specifically just to be around Billy. And just so you can understand how absolutely down bad this woman was, whenever Billy would walk into whatever room she was in, her heart would just start pounding and racing in her chest, and her hands would get all sweaty like she's some nervous teenager with a crush. And after she'd finally go home for the day and be back at her actual house with her actual husband, she still couldn't stop thinking about Billy. Like, she would be watching TV, eating dinner with her husband Greg, taking a shower, brushing her teeth while actively thinking about that little boy. She would be lying in bed with Greg, peacefully asleep next to her, thinking about what she would want to do to Billy, what they would do to each other. Ugh, okay, I'm actually discussing myself right now. And after days, weeks, probably months of this obsession just building and building, it at some point made her feelings for him overtake her completely. Like, to the point where she's thinking to herself, I cannot resist this anymore. I have to tell Billy how I feel or else I'm literally going to explode. So she decides that the very next time she sees him at school, she is going to do it. She's going to confess to Billy everything that she's been feeling. And sure enough, the next day while they're at school, she makes absolutely certain that at some point, her and Billy will end up alone together. And when it's finally just them two hidden away in some empty classroom, she leans in close to him and whispers, do you think about me? Because I think about you all the time. Oh my god, it's making my skin crawl just repeating the words that she said. Now, I know Billy is gonna end up doing something absolutely horrible later on in the story, but right now, I honestly can't help but feel sorry for the kid because he is completely and totally dumbstruck. Like, he wants to believe what she's saying, but his brain cannot process that this could be real. I mean, the poor kid hasn't even done it with anyone, let alone someone who is 7 years older and who also happens to be his teacher. But actually, the craziest part about this is that he's had a massive crush on Pamela for a while now. Like, when he had seen her at the school assembly for the first time, he had turned to his friend and told them, I'm in love with her. So now they're in this classroom together, alone, and he's supposed to believe that that same hot teacher is actually into him? Yeah, no, there's no way, not at all. He honestly thought that this was maybe just some elaborate weird prank, which, I mean, would be the weirdest and most inappropriate prank that anyone has ever pulled in the history of pranks, but that somehow sounded more believable in his mind than the alternative, which was that his teacher was genuinely saying that she thinks about him romantically. And even when Pamela straight up invites Billy over to her house, he is still not fully convinced that this is real. But then she says, my husband will be out of town and we can actually be alone together with no interruptions and no one bothering us. And when Billy hears that, he obviously agrees. I mean, this is literally the exact scenario that he and his friends would joke about all the time. And knowing that it could really happened was driving him nuts. And so just as they plan, one random night, Billy somehow manages to go over to her house, and this is where things get physical. At some point, she sits Billy down, who is still dumbfounded, by the way, and she starts playing the movie 9.5 Weeks. And if you know that movie, then you know that this is something that they should not be watching. And then she starts doing this seductive dance on him, just like the actor in the movie. And this cringed me out so bad. Like, lady, you're not the star in the movie, you are a predator, so please get some help. And later that night, they cross a line that I don't even feel comfortable repeating on here, but wherever your mind went, think worse. And I would have hoped that maybe her mind was saying, no, I've gone too far. But no, instead, she continues to secretly invite Billy over every single time her husband would go out of town. And with each visit, things just got more and more, how do I say this? Intense, which is gross, I know. But after a while, Pamela was so far into this whole affair that she could no longer wait until her husband was out of town to see Billy. So sometimes they would get creative. They would start doing it in her car or on a public baseball field. Like at this point, nowhere was off limits because as long as they didn't get caught, they never really cared where they went. When in reality, everywhere should be off limits. And Billy, he is fully enjoying every moment of this. I mean, he probably knows that it's wrong, but at the same time, he's really starting to feel like his dreams are coming true. And even more than that, he's starting to feel like he's in love with Pamela, which is very worrisome for what's about to happen next. So one day, while this whole disgusting mess is still going on, Pamela realizes that she has a really big problem, and that problem was her husband, Greg. You see, by this point, Pamela really hated having to sneak around just to spend time with Billy. It was stressful, exhausting, and took way too much effort, which honestly left me at like, why don't you just stop? But that wasn't an option for Pamela because as long as her husband Greg was around, this is how things were always going to be. And that's when she was like, wouldn't it be great if Greg was out of the picture? I mean, him not being around would mean that me and Billy could just hang out whenever we wanted. But the problem is that Pamela didn't want to divorce him. And it wasn't because she still had feelings for him or anything like that. It was purely because getting divorced would mean that she would lose everything that she owned. The dog, the condo, the money that they shared. But then that's when it hit her and she's like, wait a minute, if Greg was to suddenly magically, I don't know, die, then she would be able to collect $140,000 from his insurance policy. And just the thought of receiving that amount of money made her eyes go cha-ching. So she decides to start coming up with an actual plan to straight up murder her husband. Like, I'm sorry, bud, but your time has come to an end because your woman would rather be with a 15-year-old than you. But here's the thing, Pamela still has one major problem with her murder plan, which is that she obviously can't just kill Greg herself because that would be way too obvious. So she decides that the only way this could possibly work is if she somehow manages to convince Billy to be the one to actually do the killing. And yes, I know that sounds absolutely insane and stupid, but in her mind, I guess she just figured that there is no way anyone would even think to investigate a 15-year-old boy who's still in high school. And so one day when she's hanging out with Billy, which has become a completely normal thing in their twisted relationship, she decides to test the waters and she point blank asks him, would you be willing to do anything to keep me in your life? And Billy, this poor boy who has no idea where this conversation is actually heading or how dark it's about to get, just excitedly nods back and says, of course, I would do anything for you. Pamela just kind of shakes her head and goes, I don't believe you. So that just kind of made Billy want to prove himself even more. So he starts practically begging. And that's when she finally asks him, would you be willing to kill for me? And Billy's jaw literally drops open because that is the last thing that he would have expected to come out of her mouth. Like, yes, Billy may be in love with this woman, but he is not some hardened criminal. So of course he isn't jumping on board with this plan right away. I mean, who would? Like, oh yeah, let me just go end someone for you. No problem. Wait, I just realized I've been saying her name as Pamela instead of Pamela. We're gonna act like I've just been saying Pamela. But then Pamela starts doing what manipulators do best and she completely switches up her strategy. She starts telling Billy that Greg has been physically abusive and that he beats her, that she's living in fear every day, just really laying it on thick with this whole victim act. But even with that story, Billy is still like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. And so by this point, Pamela is just getting seriously pissed off because her manipulation tactics aren't working as quickly as she wanted to. So she decides to escalate things and tell Billy that if he doesn't do this for her, then she's going to leave him. And now that thread is really starting to get into his head because he's sitting there thinking to himself, well, okay, I definitely don't want to be a murderer and go to prison, but I really, really don't want to lose what I think is my first love. So with Pamela giving him this ultimatum, this do it or I'm gone thread, Billy finally just breaks and tells her kind of hesitantly and probably like with a very shaky voice, okay, I will do it. I will murder your husband for you. And so on this random night in April of 1990, Pamela gives Billy her car keys so that he can go over to the house and, you know, get rid of Greg just like they planned. But about halfway through the drive, Billy starts getting incredibly nervous about what he's about to do. Like, the reality of it is just now hitting him, and so he purposely makes a wrong turn and drives home instead. And to be completely fair to Billy here, I too would go home instead of taking another human's life. So, like, good job. For now, Billy, you made the right choice. But oh my gosh, was Pamela pissed off when she found out that he chickened out. And instead of being like, okay, I think I'll take that as my sign, she decides to hand over the keys again and say, here, try again and don't mess up this time. My God, she is delusional. So just like she said, Billy tries again, except this time he actually gets his friend Raymond involved to help him. And honestly, how he managed to convince this other kid to join in on a literal murder plan is completely beyond me. Like, what conversation even leads to that? But just like the first attempt, Billy conveniently gets lost again, and surprise, surprise, the plan doesn't happen that time either. And I'm pretty sure that by now Pamela is getting absolutely sick and tired of Billy's constant failures and mistakes, and maybe even getting a little bit nervous that he may never follow through with it. So she really starts pushing hard and getting in his face like, come on, man up already, what is taking so long? And just to really twist the knife and manipulate him even further, she hits him with the classic, wow, I guess you really didn't love me after all if you can't even do this one freaking thing for me. And so once again, with this ultimatum hanging over his head, Billy honestly felt like he had no other choice but to agree. So he just promised her that this time he would actually do it. So for this third time around, Pamela actually decides to plan out everything a lot more meticulously than the previous time. Like, she's designing this plan to be 100% foolproof with no room for error. And she decides that the best way to get away with her crimes is to make this entire thing look like a burglary gone wrong. So the day of this murder attempt starts off with Pamela driving 3 boys to pick up their getaway car. And yes, you did hear me correctly. There are now 3 boys involved in this plot because somehow Billy convinces 2 more of his friends to help out with this. But again, don't ask me how, because I myself cannot wrap my head around saying yes to helping my friend commit a crime. But I digress. So as Pamela is driving the boys around, helping them prepare to get rid of her husband, she calmly tells them she's gonna leave the basement door unlocked so that they can slip into the condo very easily. And once they reach the inside, she lets them know, I need you to ransack the entire house. Like, I don't care. Steal a whole bunch of things. Just make it look like an actual robbery. And then once you've ransacked the entire place, that's when you need to go hide in the corner and wait quietly for Greg to come home. And then bam, that's when you'll take him out. And the boys are all sitting there listening to this plan, and they're like, yeah, sure. I mean, that sounds good to us. And they start doing everything that she said. So the first thing they did was pick up the getaway car, which, by the way, belongs to one of the boys' grandmothers. And I just have to point out, if you plan on using your dear old grandmother's car to commit a literal crime, then maybe you should reconsider. I don't know. Anyways, so after they get grandma's car, they head to the store so that they can buy some tape to cover up their fingerprints, which I can't lie is kind of smart. And then right after, they end up picking up Billy's friend Raymond, who is still somehow on board with this insane plan. And now for those of you who are keeping track at home, we've now got 4 teenage boys who are willing to end their teacher's husband's life. But with all 4 boys assembled, they've now got everything set up and ready to go. And just like they planned, the 4 teenagers secretly make their way through the basement entrance that Pamela had left unlocked for them, all while holding weapons in their hands. Meanwhile, it's like 10 p.m. now, and Greg is finally coming home from an extremely long and exhausting day at work. But the moment that he opens the front door, he immediately can tell that something is seriously off, because for some reason, the entire house has been torn apart with all of his belongings just thrown everywhere. But before he could even fully react to what he's seeing or process what is happening, someone suddenly grabs him from behind and violently slams him against the wall. And Greg is completely startled and terrified, so he screams out, who are you? What is going on? But whoever it was that pushed him just screams back, shut up. And as he's desperately trying to process what the heck is going on around him right now, he starts hearing other voices around him in the darkness. And now he is even more terrified, because at first he was thinking to himself, okay, if it's just one person, then maybe I can fight them off and escape. But now he knows for certain that there are multiple people that broke into his home, and now he's outnumbered. And then at some point, Greg hears one of them yell very aggressively, "Get on your knees now." But something about the entire situation is just super weird to him. Like, it feels off beyond the obvious, of course, because he's starting to realize that the voices that he's hearing all around him sound oddly young. Like, these aren't grown men. These sound like teenagers or something. And that's when he actually sees that the men standing in front of him with these weapons are actually just teenage boys, like literal children. And Greg's probably thinking like, oh my God, wait, what is happening right now? Are these kids? But then one of the boys pulls out a knife and places it directly against his throat, and he just screams at him again, I said, get on your knees. And so now, however young these people might be, Greg is not about to argue with somebody who is holding a knife to his neck. So in this moment of complete defeat, he just drops to the floor and starts desperately begging for his life, just pleading with them to let him go because he doesn't want to die. I mean, who in the heck would want to die like this? But as he's begging and crying for mercy, one of the boys just screams at him, give me your wallet and your wedding ring now. And so with absolutely no choice in the matter, Greg reaches into his back pocket, grabs his wallet and throws it at them. But then when it comes to his wedding band, he just looks down at his hand and he starts begging even more intensely, saying through literal tears, please not my ring. My wife would kill me if I lost it. Which is such a tragically ironic thing, being the fact that his wife is quite literally the one who orchestrated this entire attack. But in that moment, Billy whips out his weapon and aims it directly at Greg's head, and he whispers, God forgive me. And bam, he pulls the trigger, and just like that, Greg is gone at just 24 years old. Immediately after the shooting, the boys quickly make their way to their getaway car and speed off into the middle of the night. And while all of this horrific violence was happening, Pamela was conveniently at school where she worked at, just making absolutely sure to be seen by as many people as possible, because this would be her alibi, her proof that she couldn't have possibly been involved. And as soon as she felt like she'd been seen by enough witnesses, she just casually makes her way right back home. And the moment that she opens that front door, she immediately jumps straight into that acting role of a lifetime, just letting out this vicious scream the second that she discovers Greg's body. And very quickly, police arrive to the scene and they just start looking around. And exactly like Pamela had carefully planned, it really does look like nothing more than a robbery gone tragically wrong. But here's the thing, these police officers start noticing that there is just something off about this newly widowed woman. Like, yes, she's been crying, and yes, there are tears, but there isn't really any emotion behind it. Like, these officers have seen real women lose their husbands. They've witnessed real devastating grief and real tears. But for some reason, Pamela's tears just dry up suspiciously quick. And if anything, like if we're gonna be completely honest here, she seems more annoyed that the police want her help in solving her husband's murder investigation than actually heartbroken about his death. The red flags were just laid out everywhere, but still, at this point, there wasn't any concrete evidence that could connect her directly to the crime. And plus, she had a rock-solid alibi. So police just kind of had to accept it, and they were like, okay, maybe this was just a robbery gone wrong. Until an anonymous person calls into the police station, just out of the blue. On the line is a little girl, and this girl claims that one of the boys told her about the plan to take Greg's life. And on that call, she tells the police everything. How it was actually Pamela's plan from the very beginning. How she basically manipulated Billy into doing all of this. And to top it all off, she gives them the names of the boys that were involved. I would say snitches get stitches, but I'm so glad she did that. Although a kid's statement isn't really enough hard evidence to put Pamela away, like on its own, it is definitely enough evidence to open up a serious investigation about her. And while all of this is going on, one of the boys' dads had noticed that his gun had been used without his consent. And on top of that, he noticed it had been suspiciously cleaned off. And so given everything that's been going on around town, he decided to bring it into the police station. And when Billy and the other boys hear this, they immediately panic and they try to run away out of state to avoid getting caught. But honestly, it did not take long for police to track them down and arrest all of them. And so now, with all of the boys in custody, the police honestly just need one more final piece. And that piece is a confession from Pamela herself saying that she orchestrated this entire thing. So police come up with this plan when they decide to wire one of them up with a recording device and make them talk to Pamela to incriminate herself. And this woman, having absolutely no idea that this child is wearing a freaking wire, just starts spilling everything. She's blatantly telling them that all they have to do is claim that they don't know anything. Just keep your mouth shut, stick to the story, and everything will be fine. But here's what I think is just absolutely hilarious. As she's talking to this wired up kid, giving them all of this advice on how to avoid getting caught, she literally says, and I quote, I'm afraid that one day you're gonna come in here and you're gonna be wired up by the police and I'm just gonna be busted. Like, she literally predicted her own downfall while it was actively happening. I'm weak, bro. And so soon after that, on August 1st, with more than enough proof that she was the one that definitely orchestrated this, the police get a warrant for her arrest and they pull up to Pamela's location to take her in. But on that day, she was actually just chilling in the parking lot at school, probably hoping to God that none of those kids snitched on her. And as she's she's just sitting in her car, an officer actually sees her from afar, and so he goes up to her and he says, "Hey, Pamela," and she very casually, like nothing's wrong, responds with, "Oh, hey, what's up?" And this is the part that's actually really funny to me, but like in a dark, twisted way, because the officer goes, "Well, Pam, I have some good news and I have some bad news. The good news is that we've actually solved the murder of your husband, and the bad news is you're under arrest." And just like that, she has been caught and is going to prison for a very long time. So in the end, Billy ended up serving 25 years in prison before finally being let out in 2015. And Pamela Smart is still in prison to this very day, serving life without the possibility of parole. And mind you, she still denies any involvement whatsoever in her husband's murder. That is just disturbingly shocking, but I'm not surprised. Thank you for sitting through this with me and hearing how disgusting of a human she is. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your week. Mwah, group hug.
You can't make this stuff up. Might have known the story of real-life boogeymen.
She killed the girl that she used to babysit because she was jealous of her and wanted to steal her life. Rachel Barber was born on September 12th, 1983 in Melbourne, Australia. She was the eldest of 3 daughters and came from a very loving, happy home and family. Rachel was clearly very beautiful. She even did some modeling in her spare time, but her biggest passion in life was dance. She dreamed of growing up to becoming a professional dancer and even own her own studio. This was actually such a big passion of hers that Rachel dropped out of traditional schooling so she could focus on dance full time. And that brings us to the spring of 1999 when Rachel was 15 years old. On the morning of March 1st, her father dropped her off at the tram station like he did every single day so she could get to dance class. That morning, Rachel had breakfast with her friends and her boyfriend that also went to the same dance school. And during that breakfast, Rachel was telling her friends some really odd, cryptic things. Rachel told her friends that she had a job opportunity for later that day where she was going to make a lot of money, but she couldn't tell them anything else about the job. They obviously keep pushing Rachel for more answers, and she tells them that she can't tell them anything until tomorrow. Once the job is done, she can tell them about it, but she's going to make a lot of money, and it has to do with an old female friend of hers. This is obviously really strange, but breakfast was over. It was time to get to school, so the group of teenagers, including Rachel, all went to their dance school. And then after class, instead of going to the tram station that took her to where her father picked her up every single day after class, Rachel took off walking 25 minutes in the opposite direction. Rachel told her friends that she was meeting her father at a different station that day for some reason, so they didn't think there was anything weird about it. But that was a lie. When Rachel's father went to go pick up his daughter, where he did every single day after her classes were done, his 15-year-old daughter Rachel was nowhere to be found. Her parents searched everywhere for her, but there were no signs of Rachel. They reached out to Rachel's boyfriend and her friends to see if they knew where she was, and they told her parents that Rachel was telling them about this weird, cryptic job opportunity with an old friend, but they didn't know anything else about it, and her parents had no idea about this job either, or an old female friend of hers. So Rachel's parents go to report their 15-year-old daughter missing, and the police did nothing. Police are telling Rachel's parents that Rachel probably just ran away and she would be back tomorrow, but Rachel's parents are telling the police that Rachel would not be the type to run away, like something was definitely wrong. But the police would not listen, so Rachel's parents spent the entire night into the next morning searching for Rachel. They searched for days. Days passed, and the police still wouldn't do anything to help find this 15-year-old girl. Rachel's parents are going to the police station day after day. They're like, "You said my daughter ran away and she'll be back tomorrow. 3 days have passed. Please help me find my daughter. She's missing. She's only 15 years old." But the police just kept insisting that Rachel ran away, even though they had literally no evidence to suggest that Rachel ran away. When the police found out that Rachel had a boyfriend, they just made up this theory that Rachel probably got pregnant and that's why she ran away. Even though, again, feel like a broken record, there was no evidence to suggest that Rachel was pregnant or that she ran away. At one point, the police actually tell Rachel's parents to just forget about her and go focus on their other 2 children. They actually told that to the parents of a missing child. Rachel's parents realize that the police are not going to help them, so they start investigating their daughter's disappearance by themselves. They knew that Rachel said that she was going to do some job with an old female friend, so they start putting together a list of literally every single girl that Rachel had ever interacted with in her entire life. Also covered the town in missing persons posters of Rachel, and then after a week, they finally got a tip. Witnesses saw Rachel the day that she disappeared with another girl at a tram station, and Rachel got off at a stop that she had never been to before. And Rachel and this girl that she was with appeared to be like chummy, like they were friends. So this directly lined up with Rachel's story that she was meeting an old friend. So the witness helps make a sketch of the girl that Rachel was seen with, and then her parents compare that sketch with the list of every girl Rachel has ever interacted with, and they got a match. This sketch looked just like someone that her family knew, someone that they trusted. Caroline Robertson. Caroline was 5 years older than Rachel, and she actually used to be Rachel's babysitter. So let's quickly talk a little bit about Caroline. Caroline used to babysit all three of the Barber daughters until about 1997, so about 2 years before Rachel vanished. So Rachel would have been about 13 years old and Caroline would have been 18. Caroline always seemed a little extra attached to Rachel, and there was definitely some jealousy there. Caroline always used to say that Rachel was the most beautiful girl in the world, and Caroline thought that Rachel was just perfect, that Rachel had the perfect body, the perfect face, the perfect family, the perfect friends, and the perfect life. Rachel's family moved away in 1997, which is how Caroline stopped babysitting the family, and in those past 2 years, Caroline's life went downhill. Caroline's parents divorced, her dad moved on really fast, and it felt like he kind of just replaced them with a different family. Caroline got extremely depressed and had really low self-esteem. Caroline would write in her journals all these terrible things about herself. She would write that she was ugly, that she was fat, that she hated herself, and she hated her life. But Caroline would also write in her journals like pages and pages talking about this girl that she used to babysit, Rachel Barber. She would talk about how beautiful Rachel was, how perfect Rachel was, how perfect Rachel's family was, how perfect Rachel's life was, and how Caroline wanted Rachel's life. Caroline also filled pages and pages of her journal with just details about Caroline and Caroline's family, like all of her family members' birthdays and their interests. So finally, with all of this information, the police finally decide to actually investigate. The exact stop that this witness saw Rachel and this girl that matched Caroline's description get off at was actually the town that Caroline had an apartment in. They also found out that since Rachel disappeared, Caroline really hadn't been going to work. So they go to Caroline's apartment and they knock multiple times, but she doesn't answer. So they actually bust the door down and they find Caroline on the floor of her bedroom unresponsive. Caroline had epilepsy, so she had had a seizure and was rushed to the hospital. So while Caroline was at the hospital, the police did a search of her apartment, and man, did they find evidence. Turns out Caroline had recently gone shopping. She bought brown hair dye that was the exact same color as Rachel's hair. She also bought a bunch of clothes that were too small for her, but were Rachel's exact size. There was a bunch of legal paperwork lying around, and turns out months earlier, Caroline actually tried to have her name legally changed to Rachel Barber. She also sent in a request to have a birth certificate sent to her with Rachel's name. And they finally find her diaries where she wrote about how perfect Rachel was and how she wanted Rachel's life. But they kept reading, and turns out Caroline wrote in these journals about how she killed Rachel because she wanted to take Rachel's life. They confronted Caroline in the hospital with all this information, and she confessed to killing Rachel, and she told them where they could find her body. But other than that, she never spoke to the police. So everything we know about Rachel's murder were from Caroline's diaries. This was a premeditated murder from her diaries. Caroline had been planning this for quite some time. She had called Rachel weeks earlier saying that she was taking part in a scientific experiment and she would pay Rachel $100 if she would partake in the experiment, which is how Caroline got Rachel into her apartment, and when she did, she strangled her to death. Rachel Barber was only 15 years old. She then kept Rachel's body in her closet for 2 days before wrapping her body in blankets and carpets and then putting her body inside of a big duffel bag. She then hired movers to come move a bunch of her stuff, including Rachel's body, to her father's farmhouse where she buried her body. And after Rachel's parents were worried sick about their daughter's disappearance, Caroline actually called them to tell them how sorry she was to hear that Rachel was missing, knowing full well that she was the one that killed her. And it was actually that phone call that Caroline made to Rachel's parents that reminded her parents to even put Caroline on the list of people that Rachel knew in the first place. Caroline really thought that if she killed Rachel, that she could just take over her entire life and that she would be happy. Caroline actually had appointments booked with a plastic surgeon because she was going to change her face to look just like Rachel's. Caroline refused to talk to the police. She went to trial, but she never said sorry. She never showed remorse. She didn't even show remorse in prison. She never even said why she did this to Rachel and Rachel's poor family. Caroline was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but this is going to make you so mad because after serving 14 years for the premeditated murder of a 15-year-old girl, Caroline Robertson was released on parole, meaning right this second, right now, this person is out free. This is just so absolutely frustrating. It literally makes my blood boil. This person had this little girl, trusted her. She used to babysit this girl. And then she has this girl come to her home where she kills her, tries to steal her entire life. She had planned her murder for who knows how long. And then she gets out after serving 14 years. Let me know if you're from Australia too, because you guys gotta watch out. So interested to hear your thoughts on this one. I already know the comment section is going to be spicy on this video, but while you're in the comment section, please remember to be respectful, and please remember Rachel Barber, because this is her story. And if you made it to the end of this extremely long video, thank you so much for listening to Rachel's story. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments, and while you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Thank you to everyone that suggested that we covered this case today, and I will see you guys all next time in my next video. Please be a good person to your fellow person.
How does someone creep into a basement, murder someone, then disappear right before your eyes? It took police 4 years to work it out. It was October 2014 in beautiful Martinsville, Illinois. Kaylin Whitaker was just 20 years old, and she was a student at Ivy Tech College. She was incredibly creative. She was an amazing artist. She had this really creative flair. And she was also an amazing musician. She played the cello. She was very talented. She got on with anyone she met. She was a really warm, friendly girl. And she was also a family girl. She had 2 older brothers, and she was super close with all her family. And she was living with her fiance, Connor Scott. Now, money was a bit tight. They were both pretty young, and they were actually living in Connor's parents' basement. It kind of meant that they had their own space and privacy, but not massive bills. But on Halloween night, tragedy struck. Kaylin and Connor were home alone in bed just before midnight. And Connor was like, suddenly I woke to the loudest noise. A full-on bang right in his ear. And when he looked over, Kaylin was dead. He immediately grabbed the phone, he rang 911, and he was like, a gun has just gone off and my girlfriend is dead. He's like, she's not breathing, but there's nobody else in the house. And the dispatcher's like, well, if nobody else is in the house, do you think she did this to herself? And he was like, well, I really don't think so. He said all he could see now was a gun on the floor. And when police got to the scene, there were even more questions than answers. What really didn't make sense about this crime scene is that if this was really a self-unaliving, she was right-handed, so why was the gunshot in the left side of her head? Had someone snuck in and then in the chaos managed to sneak out undetected? I mean, investigators really could not make sense of this crime scene. They hadn't got any viable suspects, so the case was ruled as a self-unaliving. But they just couldn't be sure, so work was going on behind the scenes. 10 months later, after further testing, the case was reclassified, this time as a homicide. And Kaylin's parents were absolutely horrified. They were like, what do you mean? This means that a killer is just on the loose. Terrified and with no real answers, they had to struggle on with their lives. And Connor seemed to try and move on too. He started dating a new girl. Until something happened that blew this case wide open. By this point, it was 2019, and like I said, Connor had been dating other people. He was with another girlfriend. But suddenly, one night, police were called. Connor was absolutely wasted, with a loaded weapon, threatening to unalive himself. His girlfriend said that she had told him she wanted to break up, and he was like, I will pull the trigger right now. Now, thankfully, police raced over to the scene, grabbed the loaded weapon off him, and managed to take him to hospital to sober up. But it got people thinking, was Connor really innocent after all? And this kind of rumbled on for a couple of weeks until police and Connor met once again. But this time, he strolled into the police station to make a confession. It was me who killed Kaylin. After all these years of lying to cover his tracks, manipulating the situation, finally, the family had answers. He was obviously charged with murder, but after speaking with lawyers, he decided to plead not guilty. And it was only after months that he finally accepted a plea deal and did plead guilty to this crime. And I don't know about you guys, what you think about this situation, but sometimes I do think that killers just like to have the power and the control. Sometimes I just feel like they like to mess with the family and just do anything that they can to be obstructive. Thankfully, though, he was eventually given 37 years behind bars.
I know we all have those stories and cases that we really want the answers to before we die, and this is one of those cases for me. This is Timothy Pitson. He vanished off the face of the earth in 2011 after his mom picked him up early from school. Over the next 3 days, she took him to all of his favorite amusement parks and zoos and covered 500 miles. But then he disappeared, and his mom was found dead the next day in a motel. She slashed her own wrists and throat, and she left a letter saying that she was sorry, and that Timothy was safe, but that nobody would ever be able to find him again. There are so many layers to this case, and it's one that is very heartbreaking because there has never been any closure. So let's talk about it. So this is Timothy Pitson and his mom and dad, Amy and James. He was only 6 years old when he disappeared in 2011, but up until then he was described as a really funny and kind little boy. Everyone who knew the Pitson family said that they loved Timothy so much. I mean, that was their only child, so he was their pride and joy. His mom and dad may have been struggling in their relationship in the years leading up to his disappearance, but it went without saying that they loved Timothy very much. At least that's what everyone who knew them said, including their extended family. So that makes the details of what I'm about to tell you even more shocking and sinister, because no one could have predicted what was about to happen. So May 11th, 2011 started out just like any other day for the Pitson family. James dropped Timothy off at his school in Aurora, Illinois, and watched him walk into his kindergarten class. Nothing out of the ordinary. But shortly after, at around 8:15 a.m., his mom Amy checked him out. She told the school that there was some sort of family emergency, but in all reality, that was a complete lie. No such family emergency existed. Nearly 2 hours later, Amy and Timothy dropped the family car off at a repair shop, and then an employee at said repair shop actually drove them both to Brookfield Zoo, which was Timothy's favorite. That seems a little weird to me, but then again, that could be a completely normal encounter, and I could just be reading way too much into it. So then 3 p.m. hits, and that's when Amy and Timothy make their way back to the repair shop to pick up their car, and then after, Amy drove little Timothy to the Key Lime Cove Resort in Gurnee. There they had a lot of fun at the water park and spent the night. The next day, which was May 12th, 2001, they get up early and drive to the Kalahari Resort in Wisconsin to have even more fun at yet another water park. At 10 the next morning, the two can be seen on the resort's security cameras in the checkout line, and by all accounts, nothing seems out of the ordinary. Nobody looked distressed, and overall, Timothy looked like he was having the time of his life. Shortly after leaving, Amy then begins to make a series of phone calls to her loved ones from her car. She calls her mom and brother-in-law, and she tells them that her and Timothy were safe and not in any danger. And she did this because now 2 days had passed since she checked her son out early from class, and then went radio silent. So during those 2 days, she had traveled nearly 500 miles without even contacting her husband, aka Timothy's dad, who was freaking out and calling her repeatedly trying to figure out what was going on and if they were okay. It must have been really scary for the dad because he showed up at Timothy's school on the 11th, the day that he last dropped him off at school, obviously expecting him to still be there, only for the school to inform him that his mom had actually checked him out hours prior. Police were later able to determine that the series of phone calls placed Amy and Timothy just southwest of Sterling, Illinois, near Route 40. During some of those phone calls, though, Timothy could be heard in the background saying that he was hungry. So at this point, he was alive and could be accounted for. After making her very last phone call, Amy turned her phone off, and neither she or Timothy were ever heard from again. At around 7:30 that night, Amy was seen alone on security footage at a Family Dollar store in Winnebago, Illinois. There she seemed really serious, and Timothy was nowhere to be found. She ended up buying a pen, some notebook paper, and envelopes, and she kind of just kept her head down. 30 minutes later, she was seen at a Sullivan's food store in the same area, also alone. At 11:15 p.m., Amy checked into the Rockford Inn in Rockford, Illinois, alone, and either sometime that night or very early the next morning, she took her own life. She slashed both of her wrists and her throat, and then she overdosed on antihistamines. Her body wasn't found until the next morning when a housekeeper came in to clean her room, but the housekeeper didn't just find her body. They also found a note that Amy had left behind. In the note, Amy said how sorry she was for creating such a huge mess, but she reassured everyone that Timothy was safe with people who would care for him. But she promised that although he was safe, he would absolutely never be found. So obviously this was a huge shock to everyone, and not the news anyone in the Pitson family was expecting to hear. Not only was Amy now dead, but little Timothy was still nowhere to be found. After police examined the crime scene, they found that only Amy Amy's blood was found on the knife she used to end her life, not Timothy's. And none of Timothy's blood or DNA was found in the hotel room at all. This suggests that Timothy never stepped foot inside that room. But one thing police did find was alarming. According to them, they found a concerning amount of Timothy's blood in Amy's car, the same one that Timothy had been riding in with his mom, obviously. Here's what's confusing though. So according to the Pitson family, the blood that was found in Amy's car was actually just from a nosebleed that Timothy had in it earlier that month. But what's confusing to me is that I feel like the blood would be old at that point and not look fresh. So that's what I'm not able to really understand about this case, whether or not that was old or recent. Missing from the scene though was Amy's phone, the clothes that she had been seen wearing on security footage in the days prior, and Timothy, along with his clothes and his Spider-Man backpack that was filled with toys. Authorities really didn't have much to go off of, so they really examined Amy's car. And from that examination, they found a bunch of weeds, dirt, and some grass stuck in the undercarriage. From their findings and using nearby CCTV, authorities concluded that at some point before killing herself, Amy parked her car in a grassy area, possibly near a stream but close to a highway. So then they extensively searched every area matching this description that Amy could have gone to dispose of Timothy's body had she killed him, but not a single trace of him was ever found. It was like he just vanished into thin air. One thing I found that was really odd was that after Amy made those last phone calls from her car, she drove to an area where she used to spend a lot of time in as a kid. This was in Dubuque, Iowa, and apparently she and her sister used to drive a ton on the back roads there going to visit their grandparents. So this felt like a promising lead and at least some connection to the case. Yet multiple searches of this area failed to turn up any evidence. As time went on, no one gave up on searching for Timothy, but there would really be no movement in this case until 2 years later. So in 2013, Amy's phone was found along Route 78. It was on a really remote road behind a grain storage building in Mount Carroll. Police were hoping that now that they finally had her phone, that they would have more answers. But sadly, there was no new information on it at all. Nothing they didn't already know, so this led nowhere. According to Timothy's aunt, so Amy's sister, Amy had a history of mental illness. She had been depressed a lot of her life, but she never let that interfere with her parenting. Timothy's aunt said that Amy was such a good mom, and she described them as two peas in a pod, basically inseparable. She said that anyone who looked at Amy thought that, wow, she was meant to be a mom. So to Timothy's dad and basically everyone else in the Pitson family, they refused to believe that this was a murder-suicide situation. They believed that it's just physically impossible for Amy to have hurt Timothy. According to them, there would be no world where she would ever do something like that. And although his dad knew that Amy was depressed, he never once thought that Timothy was in any danger in his mom's care. Not once. In the years leading up to his disappearance, though, they had been struggling in their marriage, and it seemed like divorce may have been coming. Timothy's aunt said that since Amy struggled with her mental illness, she thought that those issues would interfere with her getting custody of her son. So it makes what happened here all that more devastating. Although we don't know what really happened to Timothy that night, there have been a few theories over the years. Theory number one, which is believed by Timothy's dad, is that he is still alive and was kidnapped by whoever Amy gave him to that day. Some think that she didn't want her husband getting custody of him so much that maybe she gave her son to some sort of underground adoption ring. If that was the case, I guess it would make sense why whoever got him never came forward after learning about Amy's death. They were partaking in something very illegal. So of course they would never come forward and would hide Timothy away from anyone who could possibly recognize him. His aunt at one point thought that he may be in a Mormon community in Mexico, but there was never any evidence to support this. Theory number two is the Occam's razor route, that Amy killed him and then she killed herself. Some think that she had planned to kill herself and that those series of final phone calls to her family were a way of saying goodbye. And over those 3 days that she spent having fun with Timothy was her way of giving him the best 3 days of his life before killing them both. And maybe she just buried him somewhere that he will never be found. A lot of people have overanalyzed the note she left. With the knowledge we have now, knowing that she and her husband were struggling, some have pointed out that Amy never specifically said that Timothy was still alive in her note, only that he would never be found. A lot of people think that when she said he was with people who would care for him, that it was a metaphor for him going to heaven. I don't really know what to believe. I mean, I hope that he is still alive and that his mom didn't harm him, but how does that explain why there was so much dirt and grass stuck underneath her car? That to me seems a little bit suspicious and like she was driving deep somewhere to dispose of something. In 2019, everyone thought that there was a major breakthrough in this case and that he was finally found, because several residents in Newport, Kentucky started calling 911 to report a teenager who was wandering the streets. This teenager looked troubled and like he was running away from something. When police finally found this boy, he was visibly shaken and distraught, and then the boy told them that his name was Timothy Pitson, that he was the little boy who disappeared so many years ago. But sadly, after a DNA test, this was confirmed to not be Timothy. It was all a hoax. hoax. And in fact, this was a 23-year-old man named Brian Rainey. Brian had a history of being in and out of jail, and he had some mental health issues, but he was actually sentenced to 2 years in prison for lying about this. Over the years, there have been many age-enhanced photos of Timothy of what he may look like now. If alive, he would be 21 years old today, and whatever really happened to Timothy that day after being picked up by his mom remains a mystery.
She gave a piece of her body to save a stranger's life, and then days later, she's murdered. Hello, true crimers. This is the case of Renee Pagel. Viewer discretion is advised. This case occurred in 2006 in Rockford, Michigan. It was August 5th, 2006. Renee Pagel's father would enter her home after they had not heard from her in a while. And what he found was absolutely nightmarish. His daughter, 41-year-old Renee Pagel, was murdered. When police arrive, there is just blood everywhere. All over the bed, all over the bedding. It's on lampshades. It's on the walls. It's on the ceiling. And this is because Renee Pagel had been stabbed 50 times. Renee Pagel was born on July 29th, 1965, and she lived her entire life in Michigan. Renee was someone who would show kindness and grace to everybody. She was a very deeply caring individual. She wanted her life to be about helping others. And so she became a nurse and eventually a nursing instructor. She was married to a man named Michael Pagel at one point, and the two of them had 3 kids together. And Renee loved every single moment of being a mom. Motherhood was just something that was built into her DNA. Shortly before her death, Renee did something remarkable. Renee found out that one of her students, their father, had a kidney disease, and they needed a new kidney. And without hesitating, Renee offered her kidney to the student's father. She didn't even know him, never even met him. And she did it. She gave her kidney to him to save that man's life. She was a hero. And the surgery was very successful, and she would be on bed rest, obviously, for some time. Renee and Michael, at this point, have gone through a very bitter divorce, and they were going through a very bitter custody battle. But while she was laid in bed, the kids were with their dad, where he was living. And then Renee is found brutally murdered in her bedroom. So this is the property that Renee was living on. It was like a big farm property. Not exactly surrounded by a lot of neighbors. But next to the property, they had this barn with an upstairs apartment in it, and there was a tenant living in there when Renee was killed. So that kind of became their first suspect. They looked into him, they questioned him, he was very cooperative, he did everything the police asked, and they would eventually decide that he was not responsible for Renee's murder, and he was cleared. And then police began to learn about the bitter divorce and custody battle that was going on between Renee and Michael. Renee was the breadwinner of the family before the divorce. She was working multiple jobs and supporting everyone, including Michael. Michael was at one point just working a part-time job and eventually kind of just did away with that to stay home with the kids. Michael was a master gaslighter, as Renee's family and friends would say. He would guilt trip her all the time. And then he was the one to initiate the divorce. But he served her divorce papers deliberately in the middle of her teaching a class. He was a dick. He was a jerk. But that doesn't mean he killed her. Behind the property, just on the grass, they found an orange flashlight after the murder happened. It didn't yield any forensic evidence, though. At least not at that point. Like, no fingerprints or anything. But even after searching the property, they had no murder weapon. They don't know where the knife is. The flashlight was like literally the only piece of evidence they had. They talked to Michael's mother, and she tells police that he and the kids were staying at her home that night, and it was like a big sleepover type thing. And she says that at one point I heard the sliding glass door open, and then later I heard it closed. But then she later recants that when she is subpoenaed. They found a beam in Michael's house, a hollowed out beam, and when they opened it up, they found a hard drive. On that hard drive were scanned copies of a journal that Michael wrote. And in that journal was some quotes, one of them being, quote, "The bitch is such a drain. I am not appreciated for anything, not respected for anything I've done, or I am doing, or I will do. I must terminate with extreme prejudice," end quote. But then a couple of years go by. Police can't arrest anyone. But then one of her siblings gets in contact with Michael's brother, Bo. Bo would say that Michael was a liar who fooled everyone. They asked him, "Do you think he killed Renee?" He said to them, "I'm not sure, but I will tell you this. I will no longer defend him." He then tells police that a couple of years after Renee's murder, the two of them were out hunting, and Michael said something to him that was very strange. He pulled out a knife, Michael did, showed it to Bo and said, "This is how I finalize a divorce." And then he threw it into the river. Bo takes police to the exact area where this happened, hoping they can find the knife. They devised this big magnet type contraption, and they would have one person on either side with the rope, and they would slowly move it across, covering inch by inch. They found all sorts of metallic objects down there, but unbelievably, they also found the knife. Then they were able to link that flashlight found in the backyard also to Michael. At Michael's home, they found a blue flashlight. It was the exact same flashlight as the orange one, just it was blue. They found out that these two flashlights are only sold in a 2-pack. There were batteries in each one of those flashlights. They were able to link all the batteries to the same pack. And that was because of the lot numbers on the batteries. Michael denied ever going to her house the night of the murder. Well, now they know he's a liar. Michael Pagel was then arrested and charged with the murder of his ex-wife in 2020. He goes on trial and he is convicted. He would be sentenced to 25 years to life. He took a mother and a father away from their kids forever. Michael is exactly where he deserves to be, and hopefully he is there for the rest of his life.
Weird spooky Christmas stories. This is a shadow they saw on Christmas Eve. So this Reddit user said she was about 8 or 9 years old when this happened. She said it happened on Christmas Eve and she remembers it vividly, even decades later. Back then, she still believed in Santa Claus. She was full of excitement and holiday nerves, and she was trying to fall asleep so Santa can come. She finally drifted off until soft footsteps in her room woke her up. Assuming it was Santa, she kept one eye barely open, not wanting to scare him away. But that's when she saw it, a tall, completely black figure standing over her bed. It was around 6 feet tall and darker than all the other shadows around it, with the clear outline of arms, legs, and a head. But it had no facial features, no eyes, no mouth, nothing. At first, her child brain was just trying to make sense of it. A tall figure in her room on Christmas Eve must be Santa. But the figure didn't move like she thought Santa would. And it didn't say a word. It stood there for 10, maybe 15 seconds, staring directly at her. Then it stepped forward, slowly, leaned in a little closer, and stared even longer. She said she knew it was looking right at her, even without a face. It was that unmistakable feeling of being watched. Eventually, she closed her eyes, waited, and when she looked again, the figure was gone. The strange part is she lived in a really old house that had creaky floors, and she heard it walking, but she never heard the door open or close, which also was creaky, and she never saw the figure again, even though she said she did have other strange experiences in that house. The next morning, she asked her mom if she had heard Santa come into her room. Her mom paused, confused, and just kind of played along. She just assumed she was pretending. But she wasn't pretending. She insists it was not a dream. It wasn't a person. She believes it was something else entirely. Maybe a spirit attracted to the excitement of Christmas Eve. But all these years later, she still remembers the shadow that stood over her bed all those decades ago. Maybe it was Krampus. Maybe it was a ghost of Christmas past. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, or if you've ever had an experience like this, send it my way.